So much that shaped the extraordinary story of the British Empire was born here, in the complex, time-worn expanse of India. It was here the British learned the art of imperial power. Yet it was a treaty signed thousands of miles away that determined the fate of India. In February 1763, the great European powers were meeting in Paris to end years of war and to divide the world between them, from Canada to the Philippines.
Britain's representative at the peace talks was the Duke of Bedford, a stubby, arrogant little man who'd never been to any of these places. In fact, his gout had made it difficult enough for him to get to Paris. But the Bedfords did pretty well out of the summit. The Duchess was given an 800-piece porcelain dinner service by the King of France, and the Duke got India for the British.
The technologically advanced countries of Europe were eyeing up foreign lands for future conquest, and Britain had a head start.
India was decisive. It gave Britain the resources, the markets, the manpower, and the prestige to build a worldwide empire. And in the years to come, they worked feverishly to secure that prize. First, Britain took control of the Mediterranean. Then they took the Cape of Good Hope at the bottom of Africa. Then Mauritius in the Indian Ocean. Then Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, of course. And finally, Singapore. A web of strongholds right across the globe. This was the beginning of Britain's time as the undisputed top dog of the world. Yet the whole thing was built upon something decidedly fragile.
A small island like Britain couldn't by itself find the manpower to hold on to this vast new territory. So they came up with a system that would become a cornerstone of empire. They paid local soldiers to fight for them. British officers would now lead Indian troops. The colonized would provide the fighting force of colonialism for centuries to come. The Madras Regiment, founded in 1758, is the oldest in the Indian Army. It spent most of its existence fighting not for independent India, but for Britain. It doesn't bother Captain Dilip Shaker that his regiment helped to build the empire.
These are the battle honors we won under the British. On the left, you can see these are outside India, like places like Bourbon, Ava, China,
Afghanistan,
Pegu, Afghanistan,
Burma, Kilimanjaro.
Yes.
Oh, that's in the First World War in East Africa, isn't it?
Yes.
And then all these have battles you
these
fought.
are within India.
Sure, but 3/4 of your battle honours are when you were part of the British Army.
Yes.
What do you think about that?
That's great.
Well, you were on the wrong side then, if you're from an Indian nationalist point of view.
Basically
You were fighting for the British.
We were soldiers, and a soldier does not know whose region it is for he's fighting. Tomorrow, I have a fight with any other country. I'm told to fight with that country. I don't have any personal values.
Do you think? I mean, do you think the British being here was a good thing or a bad thing or what?
And whatever happens in the history is history, but still we should not be going into that. But yes, they have done good for us and even bad to us that way.
But it's a good thing they're not here, isn't it? But all the troops you could hire could never control such a huge country. The British needed a political system to keep them in power. and they found it in the Indian princes. In the mid-1800s, the British invaders signed a treaty with the local ruler here, the Maharaja of Jodhpur. They promised him he could go on running his kingdom just as before, but he'd have to pay them for the privilege. This protection racket would be repeated all over India.
Fantastic goal there by Mehrankar. They have finally woken up, ladies and gentlemen.
In time, the ruling classes of the two peoples would become entwined.
Defender with the backhander, turning the tide a little bit. Ramesh on the near side.
British customs and British dress became part of the trappings of Indian court life. The present Maharaja is the product of both cultures. This is the family palace, designed for them by a British architect. Understated little place.
Morning, sir. Welcome to Taj Mahal Palace.
Good morning. Good morning.
But as the British extended their grip on India, they tore up the treaty they'd made with the Maharaja's ancestor. They stripped the Maharajas of their power, but let them keep their palaces.
This way.
This is your drawing room, is it?
This is my drawing room. Yes, we've tucked ourselves into a little corner of the palace.
And all these chaps on the walls there
All
are
my
ancestors, aren't
Yes,
they?
absolutely. That's my father behind you. And that's my great-great-great-grandfather.
Great-great-great-grandfather. Splendid beard.
Yeah.
I suppose the first question is, what should I call you?
Babji.
But what does that mean?
Everyone calls me Babji. Babji is a term of endearment as well as a term of respect.
What does it mean?
Literally, it means Bap, which means father. And G is like an honorific.
But even as a child, you were called Babji.
Yes, absolutely.
Your own involvement, of course, in Britain is considerable, isn't it?
Since the age of 8.
You were sent away to school in England, then?
Prep school, yes. Prep school to Cot Hill, then Eton, then Oxford. 14 years in all.
So you were really brought up as an English child.
English boy. But I would switch.
Is that good?
I would switch, being what I was, being an Englishman and become an Indian when I came home.
When you look back at that original treaty, how do you feel about the British reneging on it?
My ancestor at that time, he was very unhappy. First of all, to sign that treaty in the beginning, but he had no option left to self-preservation. But then he was very unhappy with until the period came when we learned how to use that presence to our advantage, get the best out of the system.
And at that point, it becomes unclear who's pulling whose strings, doesn't it? Quite tricky. At the heart of British authority was a gigantic confidence trick. It worked for as long as the illusion could be maintained. Take Government House in Calcutta. It was the seat of British power in India. It's still the headquarters of the regional government today. When it was built in 1803, there were fewer than 6,000 British officials nominally ruling over some 200 million Indians. As one British Governor-General who lived here put it, if each black man were to take up a handful of sand and by united effort throw it upon the white-faced intruders, we should be buried alive. And that's the reason for the scale, the grandeur, the sheer boastfulness of this place. The idea being, if you look like a ruler, the people will treat you like a ruler. It helps to explain that arrogant, self-satisfied look you see on the faces of so many British imperialists. But the appearance was an enormous bluff. It could only be a matter of time before that bluff was called. Lucknow in the mid-19th century was, according to visitors, an enchanting place. The British here enjoyed a life of luxury and tranquility. But in May 1857, all that changed. Fired by decades of resentment, Indian troops rose up and killed their own officers. Indian servants murdered British families. The Indian Mutiny, or First Indian War of Independence, had begun. It reached its climax at the British headquarters in Lucknow. Here the myth of imperial power was shaken to the core. 3,000 British and loyal Indians were trapped inside and surrounded by 8,000 rebels. A terrifying siege was about to begin.
I think these must have been the servants' quarters or the kitchen or something. They're too small to be formal rooms, but the amazing thing about it is that this place was just obviously built to impress the local Indians, and it ends up this scene of complete terrified squalor. I mean, at the height of the siege, there were 10 Europeans dying every day, just here. And these must be the marks of some of the cannonballs that struck the building. These ones didn't actually go through, but in other places you can see the balls have just gone straight through the wall. And that down there, I think, is what was the banqueting hall. But during the course of the siege became used as the hospital and was absolutely packed with the wounded, obviously, but also the sick, because inevitably what happened was that all the latrines filled up and overflowed, and there were corpses rotting in the heat everywhere, so cholera broke out. And it was the job of many of the small children to wipe the flies off the faces and the wounds of the injured inside the hospital there. It must have been an absolutely appalling scene.
After 4.5 months, British relief forces arrived. As they fought their way into the stinking ruins, they showed no mercy. In the story of empire, rebellion always met with savage retaliation. One British commander alone executed 6,000 men. Elsewhere, he flogged suspected mutineers, made them lick blood from the slaughterhouse floor, and then hanged them. In other cases, mutineers were tied to the ground, branded with hot irons, told to run for their lives, and when they did so, were shot dead. It was not enough merely to punish. An example had to be made. The psychological impact of the conflict was massive. Each side now knew how very thin was the veneer of civilized coexistence, that with the right provocation they could unleash hell on each other. "2,000 men, women and children had perished in the siege. The pretense of British rule had been shattered, the bluff called. And when peace returned, British attitudes hardened. The poet Rudyard Kipling called it wearing knuckle dusters under kid gloves. The British would soon find a new way of showing who was boss. Look there. This bleak patch of waste ground outside Delhi was once the setting for a series of extraordinary spectacles. They were called durbars, the Indian word for a meeting between ruler and ruled. It was less a meeting than a ceremonial show of strength. One Indian called it terror in fancy dress. Presiding over each of these gaudy ceremonies was the British ruler in India, the Viceroy. One of them understood the power of extravagant display better than any other. Lord George Nathaniel Curzon went the rhyme, was a most superior person. He liked to assemble his magnificent uniforms, including assorted foreign decorations, from various places, one of them being a London theatrical costume shop. Magnificent events like this were meant to dazzle the country into submission. A few old statues in the corner of this foreign field are all that's left. Hello. Even the caretaker of this peculiar place isn't much interested. Hello.
Hello.
Can I ask you some questions? What do you think of all the statues just down here?
इसके बारे में यहाँ तो कोई आता जाता नहीं है, कुछ भी नहीं, ऐसे ही रहता है, कभी आ जाते हैं गोरे लोग कभी कभार.
Oh, I'm afraid we're some of the occasional white men. But do you know what happened here?
नहीं, मेरे को तो शौक नहीं है, ना मैंने मालूम किया इसके बारे में ज़्यादा.
Not very interested.
इसके बारे में तो पता है, सब जानते हैं. बाकी एक हुकूमत हमारे मुल्क में आके हुकूमत करा किसी को भी अच्छा नहीं लगता. कोई हमारे घर में आके हम पे हुकूमत चलाए या कुछ कहे तो किसी को भी अपने देश में अच्छा नहीं लगेगा.
There's one relic of the British Raj that still exerts something of its old magic. Like the Taj Mahal, the Victoria Memorial is a shrine to a woman, a British queen in the heart of Calcutta. In the person of Queen Victoria, the British liked to believe the empire had achieved human form. They cooked up the resonant but meaningless title of Empress of India for her. But she was more than a title. Victoria was Empress, Mother, virtual God. In the years following the mutiny, over 50 statues of her were commissioned and shipped out from Britain. The Maharaja of Baroda, for example, paid £15,500 for a solid marble statue. And at the feet of it, flowers were regularly laid, and every week it was given a shampoo to keep the old queen looking spruce. Victoria had plenty to smile about. A mix of enterprise and cunning, brutality and pomp had turned India into the biggest, richest and most significant colony in the empire. By the closing years of Victoria's reign, India formed the heart of an empire that stretched from Canada in the west to Australia in the east. It was time to celebrate. Victoria's Diamond Jubilee on the 22nd of June 1897 was the grandest showing off of empire Britain would ever see. If the Indian Durbars were designed to cow the empire's subjects, the Jubilee was a piece of theatre meant to fire the British public with imperial fervour. A vast cavalcade made its way across the capital to the so-called parish church of empire, St. Paul's Cathedral. Thousands of troops had been summoned from all over the empire. Canadian hussars, Indian lancers, Cypriot policemen wearing fezzes, Jamaicans in white gaiters. There were Hong Kong policemen, Australian cavalrymen, Dayaks, Maoris, Rajas and Maharajas. In the midst of all this frenzy rode the matriarch of empire. She allowed herself an occasional tear. The day was marked by celebrations throughout her colonies. The Daily Mail brought out a special edition in gold ink to mark the occasion. As the procession passed, its star reporter was quite overcome. You begin to understand, as never before, what the empire amounts to. Not only that we possess all these remote, outlandish places, but that we send out a boy and he takes hold of savages and teaches them to obey him and to believe in him and to die for him and the Queen.